Soaring through the summer breeze, the haunted wailing of a steam train, it takes me back and sets my spirit free. My parents died when I was just a boy. They sent me to my aunt in Tennessee, but in those hills I stumbled on the railroad. So much older, the heartache and the pain has surely changed. But now my blood is of the railroad. It's got my heart, it courses through my veins.
Well, hello there. It's right good to see you. The museum's supposed to be closed today, but I guess it's okay if you look around. I was down in the boiler room fixing that darn contraption again. Can't complain, though. That's why they keep me around here. Seems I'm one of the few geezers left that know anything about this old stuff. I thought I'd come upstairs and see who was here. Guess I ain't gonna get a nap with you around. Oh, I'm just funning you now. Right glad for the company, actually. What? Oh, yeah, I guess you're looking at all them highfalutin display cases. They tell a story of some pretty influential people from the old days. Powerful industrialists they call Tycoons. Right pretty name for the bad ones. Reckon it ain't good enough for the honorable ones. They were all men of action, though. Changed the world, they did. But they all started off same as regular folks like you and me. Oh? You think you could build an empire of your own if you'd gotten started in them days? Well, why don't you give it a try, then? Click on that first display case on the left there and get started. This here's about the American West. Well, west of New York City anyhow. You see, the nation hadn't been able to use much of the land west of the Appalachian Mountains because it was just too difficult to move goods to and from those markets. Now, the trains changed all that. Now, the nation had a quick and reliable form of transportation. Go west, the man said, and so they did, by the trainload. Great job. Don't know if I could have done better myself. Now, with that important link in place, I do believe there's a tidal wave of folks getting ready to follow the railroad west into America's newly opened heartland. In the middle of the 1800s, things were right tough in the old world of Europe. Most of the land was owned and controlled by the aristocracy, and that meant few opportunities for the common folk. But in America, you could make a name for yourself instead of having to inherit the right one. Whole German communities picked up and resettled in the Midwest, lock, stock, and barrel. Sometimes you could barely tell you weren't back in the old country. Well, you got 'em all neatly resettled and made a pretty penny for yourself. Fine, real fine. I think I'll get me a bratwurst. Say, that there is a right interesting story. It's a story about a race. Two companies, the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroads, set out to connect the East and the West Coast of the United States by rail, although at the time they weren't so united. However, by the time they finished, everyone was mighty proud, and none too shy to say so. Half of the journey here was the job of the Central Pacific. Their task was to challenge the Rocky Mountains themselves. You built that route lickety-split. I might start to thinking you'd done this before. Molehills out of mountains is what you made them Rockies. Nacogdoches, Texas. Now, it didn't have much of a ring to it back in 1888 either, but that year it put the state of Texas on an industrial track that hasn't derailed yet. Thanks to Petillo Higgins and Captain Lucas. Now, these fellers risked their entire fortunes on this little used stuff that locals called Texas tea, black gold, or maybe you've heard the name oil. Yep, Texas had a new industry from that day on, and it didn't include cattle. Go figure. Finished up that job slicker than grease on a rail, or should I say oil. In 1941, America had just entered World War II. Now, they were right stubborn at first. Didn't want to get involved in European politics and such. Well, that changed after Pearl Harbor. The war stirred up a hornet's nest of transportation worries. War means men and material, and that meant transportation. The fact that it was World War II meant that it was one humdinger of a scale. They could have used your know-how, don't you think? You certainly untied that knot. Not a minute too soon, for my reckoning. Good work. Now that you've helped America through her greatest crisis, it's time to switch gears and focus on the old world, Europe. Back in 1848, monarchies were being threatened all over Europe. It was about that time that a young man named Otto von Bismarck started work on unifying the Germanic nations in Central Europe. He saw the upheaval as the perfect opportunity to create a German nation under one centralized government. He was no man of the people, but his political and social savvy saw that these small countries could grow together into a major power in Europe. Now, ain't you just a big old empire builder? All those independent states just up and followed your lead. Looks like nothing you can't do. In 1860, Britain's worldwide empire was well underway. However, the infrastructure on the island itself was not up to the task of fueling the world's first industrialized nation. No town in Scotland was in greater need of rail link than Edinburgh. Now, this was no easy task, because laying the track was only one half of the job. This line needed to become the essence of British railway engineering, speed, and efficiency. Now, think you know what it takes to make this kind of thing happen? Zoom! Like ball lightning, I says. You handle that like a champ. I'm sure history will thank you right kindly. The Alps. Them's one tough chunk of rocks, that's for sure. For centuries, it's been a difficult barrier and made travel from Italy to Germany too costly for commerce. That's where the train come in. See, Getting through and making a connection to the north and south means a whole new world for Europe. Yep, treasure and commerce was to be had by those brave enough to challenge them mountains. Sure is one heck of a rock, though. Little bit here, little bit there. Turn that rock into a pile of gravel to set your rails on. I was right happy to watch you do it, too. Northern and Southern Europe just got a little closer because of you. It was after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War that the French citizens once again demanded political change. The result was a new government known as the Third Republic. It was a fragile start, though, like a scared little rabbit. They needed to prove this government was strong and resourceful, so they took to building up the country's infrastructure. I think you'll see it weren't so easy. Vive la Frenches! Or something. You know, you showed them there's nothing that can't be done well if you put your mind to it. The government is as strong as you now. Now this here is the legacy of the Orient Express. This railway was one of the most romantic and celebrated railways in the world. It was started in 1883 and was one of the first European railways to regularly cross national borders. Its most exotic leg of the journey started in Vienna, Austria, and ended in the ancient city of Istanbul, Turkey. Getting the train going on this route was a monumental task of both politics and engineering. Not a job for the casual tycoon. Handle that like a real-life diplomat, you did. Nary a scratch on you, neither. Fine work. But you know, railroads weren't just a plaything of the Europeans and the Americans. The rest of the world had caught railroad fever too, and hoped to use railroads to close that gap and catch up to the rich countries of Europe and North America. Whoa, now, ain't you in the wrong display room? Go to the room on the right by clicking on the sign shaped like a right-facing arrow. Back before 1880 in Argentina, attacks from Native Americans in the Pampas region west of Buenos Aires made expansion into the interior difficult. In 1879, General Julio A. Roca began what was called the War of the Desert, and by 1880, he had quelled all hostilities in the West and opened ranching and farming for exports. Now, this sparked what was to be the longest period of growth Argentina would see to date. General Roca, step aside. There's a new general in town. Boy, howdy! Ha! The gauchos are moving into the new range like cattle. Argentina won't be crying over much now. For 2 decades, the great tycoon Cecil Rhodes struggled to build the longest, toughest railroad of them all. A railroad that would connect the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa all the way up to Cairo at the northern end of the continent, crossing the plains, jungles, and desert. He only got partway there before dying in 1902. Many have tried to complete this link, but in over 100 years, no one has yet to succeed. Are you sure you got the stomach for this job? Well, the dark continent ain't gonna be nearly as dark now that you hep out. Right pretty piece of work, if I say so myself. Oh, that there was quite a dilemma. On June 16th, 1964, an earthquake registering 7.5 hit Niigata, Japan. Luckily, few people lost their lives, but Damage was quite bad. Help was badly needed if more people weren't going to suffer from lack of supplies. The city was all beat up, right bad. Maybe you could lend a hand? You're just a humdinger of a troubleshooter, ain't you? Great work, friend, just great. You know, here we are with almost 300 years of history since the first iron spike in 1830. What do you mean you weren't thinking about the most recent 100 years, the 21st century? Sheesh, the history books these days can't hardly separate fact from science fiction. Whoa, now, ain't you in the wrong display room? Go to the room on the right by clicking on the sign shaped like a right-facing arrow. After the global warming catastrophe during the early half of the 21st century, the polar ice caps melted and exposed new areas that once were covered by snow and ice. The newly exposed areas became prized real estate in these dark times. Greenland was one of these places. Unfortunately, the land was barren. That's when some scientists put together some genetic seeds. Seems they done fixed them so they grow real quick like. The problem is getting them to spread out before they gone bad. You gotta think fast if you're gonna help out. Figured it out, I see. Green and purty. The name Greenland isn't a joke anymore. Now don't get all high and mighty on me. You got other things left to do. Holland never says die. The Dutch were at it again, and they reclaimed their homeland and then some. 20 years after being one of the first nations claimed by the rising waters generated by global warming, the Dutch, who were then living on floating atolls, began to start building dikes again. With that and them newfangled windmills, they done pumped out a whole new home from the seas. People's coming in from everywhere, though, and ain't much left of the old transportation system. You got any ideas? Now, ain't you the smartest little problem solver? Got that all fixed up before they knew they had a problem. The Dutch are a dominant force in Europe once again. Expect they'll be throwing tulips at your feet any time now. Seems the huge shift in world geography was apparently more than that poor old San Andreas fault could take. It snapped with a vengeance and tore a big chunk of California away from the mainland of North America. Fortunately, it heaved up above sea level, too, and exposed a soggy but usable chunk of land. Now they gotta get resettled out there on that island.